We are live on the RotoViz Best Ball Show. We are in to do a draft in the FFPC $35 entry Best Ball Superflex tournament. We are fortunate enough, Tom, to have got the 102, so we will be straight on the clock. So we're jumping into that part of the conversation for that first pick, but probably will be pretty straightforward. We'll see who goes at the 101, and then we'll have a quick conversation.
You are on the clock.
It is Josh Allen, who we thought would be the case. So the conversation, before I even get to introduce Tom Strachan, who is here with me on the show today from the Fantasy Football Sanctuary, among many other outlets as well. We have an option here really between Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. I'd probably lean to Mahomes for the stacking partners that at this ADP are more likely to fit into this lineup. How do you want to split it? Are you Mahomes over Hurts either way, or are you?
Yeah, I think I'm Mahomes, and it kind of comes down to the fact that I just have less question marks about Mahomes. I think, we've seen loads of stuff from Jalen Hurts to suggest that he's a very, very good quarterback. But Kellen Moore might just not be the kind of offensive coordinator we hope. Yes, they're probably going to run more motion this year than they did last year when the Eagles barely ran any motion. But there's just a few question marks I think you can throw around the Eagles. Things like Nick Sirianni, is he actually a good head coach? Whereas the Chiefs, they had one particular problem last year, which was that their wide receiver group wasn't particularly good outside of Rashee Rice. And now I think they've built around him a very good wide receiver room. And it's just kind of hard to doubt Mahomes with everything they've got going on.
Yeah, no, I think that, I was talking with Sean Siegel on RotoViz Overtime earlier today, and we were talking about our FFPC main event draft, which will be released over the coming days. But we did draft CJ Stroud in that particular format, and he's talking about the way Stroud could be, this year's kind of Patrick Mahomes of regular years. But, both of those guys could do this, but Mahomes could be, 2013 Peyton Manning with the cast of characters that he has around him. Like at this stage, it might seem to some people like, sacrilegious or something to say, but, Travis Kelce might be the third best receiving option on this roster at the moment, moving forward. So it is exciting. Now, I do have to also mention that as this draft has gone along, Jalen Hurts did get to 6, which I think is an incredible steal for the drafter in the 6th spot. I don't think they were thinking that would come into consideration. But the draft has started with Josh Allen, Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Hurts, CeeDee Lamb. The thing I like about Mahomes, which can be a lot more tricky in the last 2 weeks than it was a month ago, is stacking him with his cohorts in that lineup. So the likes of Worthy and the likes of Rice have jumped multiple rounds in some cases in ADP. And from draft to draft now, that can be a case where people will spring and try and get them. But I do think that we'll probably be in most cases on the turn ahead of ADP. So we may be the ones that could do the reaching if we decided to do so. But you can never, draft Patrick Mahomes in a super flex format and feel bad about it. And the one thing I'm sure, Tom, you feel good about now is you've got a quarterback in the first round, because myself and Tom have drafted a lot of these over the last, probably 6 weeks. And the battle always comes down to when the QB2 is drafted. Sometimes it's when the QB1 is drafted. I'm tempted to try and push quarterback, but Tom's always trying to rail me back in again. So we probably will wait multiple rounds here before getting that second quarterback. The quarterback in the second round that gives me pause to think about doing a 2 QB build in those opening 2 rounds is Jaden Daniels. If he was there, he does be in that range, but we will have other options. And it kind of is a case that if all the guys are gone, then we might look into that. So I'm excited to see how the draft plays out. And we've been doing them all in slow formats. Tom, the fast format is a lot of fun because you get to make those decisions on the fly, but hopefully those slow drafts that we've done give us those kind of muscle memory to make good decisions when it gets to it. So the topic I highlighted for today's stream was buying the dip, and I guess the other part of that is buying into the hype. And there has been obviously a lot of hype around the Chiefs, so it's a good starting point with Patrick Mahomes. We've seen Xavier Worthy of some dynamic highlight plays in preseason over the last couple of days. And then the news with Rashee Rice's suspension being unlikely to impact 2025 if there is a suspension, or 2024, sorry, has bumped his ADP up. So there is a rise in price, and it's a case of do you buy in at that price? Because that's what we're going to have to do if we want to stack the Kansas City Chiefs in this. And we're also going to talk about picks where maybe potentially you could buy the dip on those. And some of those that have been in obviously very clear focus over the last kind of 48 hours would be Jalen Warren, who picks up the hamstring injury, week 1 maybe in question. But if you get a significant discount on a player that we're already drafting prior, I think we'll be interested in buying the dip. Is there certain situations what you've seen over the last like 2 or 3 weeks where those dips mean that you're completely out? One of the ones that I was drafting quite a bit of that I've had to like take a back seat on, but I am still drafting when it gets to the case where it's 4 rounds after where he was going, 6 weeks ago. That's Kendre Miller. I am wondering if his head coach knows that he is, still an active human at this point, but we are getting huge dips, and like his dip is a crater more than a dip. But is there any players that the dip has been so much that you've just had to, like the news and the drumbeat has been so poor that you've had to stop drafting at all?
So Kamani Vidal was definitely a player because, like, when you looked at his situation, you had Daniel Popper of The Athletic saying that he didn't even think that Vidal could be on 53 if he carried on the trajectory he was on. And Daniel Popper's a pretty good beat reporter, been around the Chargers for a long time. So that was one where, I mean, we got a substantial dip on Vidal, and maybe that's one where I should have been more playing into it just a little bit, but I didn't take any over the last couple of weeks. And then today, we fast forward after Vidal played well this weekend, and now Daniel Popper's kind of walking back his projection and saying, look, I think I got this one wrong, which credit to him as a beat writer, because a lot of beat writers wouldn't be so quick to do that. So that is definitely a tough one in a situation where I don't really have any strong feelings about that backfield. I think, Gus Edwards definitely faded and looked worse last year than he did in previous years. J.K. Dobbins, as we know all about the injury history, and then I don't think there's anybody else interesting there. So maybe that was one where I should have hedged it a little bit, but you just don't want to end up getting too far in on a player sometimes that then it becomes difficult to smooth your exposure down to a level where you won't feel even worse.
Yeah, and that is 100% true. It's always about trying to balance it. And I've mentioned before, I tend to, the players I like to draft go in very aggressively on. And that leads to the case where I have like multiple players over 30% at the moment. And, then it gets to a point where if that news is negative, you start to be like, well, my whole season could be in tatters at this point. So it is a case where you have to understand the risks as well off drafting those players. But if it's something that you can see that is a short-term concern rather than a long-term concern, you have the opportunity to get more exposure at those lower prices as well. So we'll talk more about it as we do go through. And the other part I think that can be trickier is buying the players at those higher prices as well. But we are 2 picks away. And speaking of buying players at high prices, I might start to pitch a name. I'm sure Tom knows who I'm thinking of. But one of the reasons I went with the decision of Mahomes as well over Hurts is, the way you can stack them. And AJ Brown rarely gets back to that turn in the draft time. And so he goes 2 picks before. So, rather than be hugely disappointed, you can like move on and look for stacks later. And usually you see if you miss out on AJ Brown, it means that you're really looking then at a situation trying to get Devontae Smith a little bit later. So it's a narrower window. We are back on the clock. We have a number of options here. Jaden Daniels did go. Sam Laporta would probably be my preferred pick. Jamar Gibbs is another option that I would have a consideration for here. But what's your thoughts, Tom? I'm going to lean to you here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely fine with Sam Laporta. I think in this format, it's all about trying not to fall. It's trying to like make sure you're well covered at certain positions.
The interesting thing on Sam Laporta is we did draft Trey McBride over Sam Laporta in the main event. So I'm actually looking to go with McBride if we want to reach, but McBride will get back if we want to take Gibbs here and then take McBride on the way back.
I'm not really high on Gibbs. I would rather go Caleb Williams than Gibbs. Can I interest you in that with 10 seconds?
I want to take Trey McBride. Are you okay with that?
Well, you can take Trey McBride. I'm fine with it. Yeah.
We can talk through the other ones. I assume that you're okay that we were going to go tight end at that particular pick. So the option usually there has been Sam Laporta, but I want to get some Trey McBride in this particular team as well.
That's why I'm kind of fine with it, because I think I don't have strong feelings about Sam Laporta's ability to be the tight end 1 overall. Again, I think touchdown regression is something that could be a big problem for him. But yeah, I'm not sure I take Trey McBride ahead of Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews still.
Yeah, the part that I'm considering here is I may, depending on what happens, like if Laporta come back or even if Kelsey come back, there's a possibility you could do that to start things off here. I'm open to Williams as well. I really see the advantage of trying to fill out your other spots, because in this being super flex, you miss out your second flex spot that you would normally have at the FFPC to be a quarterback spot if they play. But if you had Trey McBride and Sam Laporta, they can also fill those additional flex spots in this particular situation. So we are waiting to see what happens. Saquon Barkley was the first pick by the drafter at the turn. We're waiting on that second pick. Is Williams a strong call for you here?
Well, I think Caleb Williams is the last one where we can really push quarterback, which I know you love to do. I know you've got some of those really late quarterbacks that you like. But Caleb Williams has that dual threat ability, maybe not as much as Jaden Daniels, but he does rush a decent amount of times. We know he can scramble, create out structure, feel pretty good about that offense. So I do like Caleb Williams, but I think if we were going a second tight end, I'd probably just lean towards Travis Kelce for the stack. Where are you at on that one with Marvin Harrison going before us?
Yeah, Marvin Harrison went. I would, like, if it was a running back related pick, I would be looking to go Gibbs. I would probably be okay going with Kelsey. I just think that Kelsey is beyond his peak at this point. And the other two tight ends are tight ends who are heading towards their peak. I don't think we have to have the two tight ends. I don't particularly feel like I want to go with Williams, but I want to have a balanced team. I took McBride.
No.
I took McBride. So
let's take Sam Laporta, because it's not the type of team I build, but then I'm going to push you on some picks next time around. But how many teams are you building out like this with the double tap on tight end quite early?
Very rare in like a situation like this. I haven't done a Trey McBride, Sam Laporta team this way. I think it's kind of interesting to do here. I do want to push the quarterback position in these drafts, particularly if I've got one in the first round. So I'm willing to see how we can play that out. Now, because you've let me do that, I'll probably let you take Geno Smith if you want when we get to that kind of tier of quarterback. But the part that I was kind of the part that I was surprised, you said that, I think you said the phrase that you're not in on Jahmyr Gibbs. You might have said you're out on Gibbs. What's the concerns with Gibbs? Because I think when you're doing this particular format, running back does have an advantage, because you are usually starting at one less wide receiver in this format. You know, if you're looking at the regular FFPC format, you can start up to 4 wide receivers with the 2 flexes, and this with the super flex, you're likely to be starting one less. So that leads to running back being advantageous. And I feel like when we're looking at this tier of running back, it is interesting. You have Achane, you have Kyron Williams as well, who are very interesting at that point of the draft. But that opening tier, because quarterback is pushing down some of the names, becomes kind of interesting with him. And I do think that although he is dealing with the competition with Montgomery there, you are in a situation where it could be a case that they just go all in on Gibbs. Like David Montgomery's fine. He's not a special running back. And Jahmyr Gibbs is somebody who could be, in that Christian McCaffrey mold.
Yeah. So when it comes to Gibbs and Montgomery, part of it is like, it'd be a lot easier for me if Montgomery hadn't looked better last year than he had in years. Like, he had 4.0 evaded tackles per game compared to Gibbs, who had 3.5, both of which are really good numbers. But like Montgomery definitely showed me a side of him that I hadn't seen before. I think that Montgomery's not a complete zero in the passing game, which means that it's not always going to be Jahmyr Gibbs who's out there on the passing downs. David Montgomery is a decent goal line back, which we know is a big part of what the Lions like to do. But also, if the Lions are going to see a second-year step up from Gibbs in the scenario where Gibbs hits, we can also play out scenarios where they see quite a substantial step up from Sam Laporta. If Sam Laporta pays off this kind of ADP and this tight end 1 overall positional value that he has across many formats, then that's really probably going to have to eat into Jahmyr Gibbs' ceiling. And if Jameson Williams, who the coaching staff have relentlessly talked up, even comes close to being, useful, then that's probably going to come at the detriment to the running game. So,
but the tricky part of that is that can all be flipped. So you could have
Jahmyr
Gibbs, having 60-yard touchdowns, and then the rest of the offense is missing out on all that opportunity. And you could also have a case where he does show that he can do some goal line work, and then he has that, and then Montgomery has 0.
Yeah, I definitely can see that scenario, but I think for me it's harder to imagine Jahmyr Gibbs outscoring CMC, Bijan, and Breece Hall. And I think, he can be a top 3 running back, but I don't think I can see him outscoring all of them. And if I'm not getting that at this point in the draft, I tend to lean just towards some of the wide receivers. Like, I think when you look through the wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably one who, again, I don't, but Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, like, all of them, I have confidence that they could finish as the wide receiver 1 overall.
The problem was they were all drafted before we made
Yeah, exactly. So it was definitely, that's why I kind of ended up coming back around to the second tight end pick, because there was no running backs who I wanted. I don't mind Jonathan Taylor, but again, I don't really feel a great level of confidence. I think if it wasn't Jahmyr Gibbs, I probably would have preferred to go slightly further down the board and get, somebody who I believe has that potential. That's why I was also kind of more open to a second quarterback early on, whereas normally in these drafts, my ideal draft is like QB in the first half of round 1 and then a quarterback around round 4 to 5 for the second quarterback. Whereas like whenever you go 2 quarterbacks very quickly, it never feels particularly great and then feel like you're chasing yourself at another position.
I'm wondering if we'll end up feeling... I haven't gone this way with quarterback, tight end. And although I love both our tight ends, drafting them very heavily, I haven't done it. So there's always that little bit of uneasiness as to how it plays out. Like if we get now to our 2 picks and we have the chance to, like, I think Williams goes with Kyron Williams is on the board here. But if we were to get 2 of, let's say, Chris Olave, Deebo Samuel, Nico Collins, like I think Jalen Waddle even, I think that really changes how you would look at this board. If they all happen to go in the next 4 picks, then you're looking at like, well, we slipped up here. We probably shouldn't have went this way. We have work to do the rest of the draft. So I think we're set up in a very interesting spot. And I think that there's a chance that in 5 picks time, we'll think that this was a stroke of genius to take the 2 tight ends. The other part is it can get difficult because I'm getting quite fortunate with draft spots in this format, and I've had quite a few drafts that I'm in the 1 through 6 spot at the front end of the draft. So the difficult part of that, though, is I have noticed that sometimes if I'm going tight end early, like Trey McBride, you are seeing like, Kyle Pitts comes back here, maybe Brock Bowers gets back in the next turn, and you're like having to pass on some of your favorite targets because you've gone in at that position. But looking at the players who are drafted since we took our selection, like Drake London would be somebody I would like to have on the roster. But the players I want to have are Dalton Kincaid and Mark Andrews, and then the Gibbs, Achan run there of picks. So Samuel and Kyron Williams go off the board, but we are back up, and we're probably going to have to draft our boy, Chris Olave.
I'm fine with Chris Olave. I've cooled a little bit in recent weeks, just not having much faith in.
Well, if you want to change the direction, that's okay. Because the names that I would mention are Collins, Waddle, and then we have to look at Malik Neighbors would be another name to look at here. If we're like, I'm okay to go in which direction you want to.
I'm good with Chris Olave because I think, like, in terms of a wide receiver 1 for our team, he fits well. And even if our offense is pretty bad, we've seen plenty of bad offenses give us good wide receivers or good volume enough to sustain. So yeah, Chris Olave works. But then coming around the turn, I don't feel like either Matthew Stafford or Justin Herbert must-have players here. I think I'd rather now push quarterback further. And also, I'm not wild on Travis Etienne. He's not a player I've ever particularly found myself wanting to draft. So it really kind of comes back to just the wide receivers, because I don't, taking another tight end here would be a little bit too crazy for me.
That could be malpractice. I do think that like that, but my point a moment ago with going with the two tight ends, if we had a chance, to take a wide receiver and say McBride at the 302, I would be ideally doing that. And then at this point, you see, like you do have George Kittle, you do have Kyle Pitts. I love drafting both of those. Really love drafting Kittle so far this offseason. So you mentioned Etienne, he goes at the turn. I always just have that soft spot for Etienne. Missed his rookie season as a player that has a hybrid profile, but has not been used very well schematically in that offense. You look at and dream of him in a situation like the Miami Dolphins running backs get, and I think it's a completely different picture. They tend to, in Jacksonville, like to just run him into a wall, and that's obviously not ideal for scoring fantasy football points. So he was somebody last year in particular I was extremely heavy on. This year, a lot less off him. Now, we do have an option here of all three of those wide receivers, and I've been quite pushy so far. The only thing I'll say is I'd probably go Neighbors or Waddle over Collins, but you can have you're on the clock. You make the pick.
For me, this one's Jalen Waddle. I really like Jalen Waddle. I think that, the Dolphins probably only make as many rushing touchdowns as they did last year because Jalen Waddle was dealing with so many injuries and he was banged up at times. I think that we're going to see a very clear regression from the Dolphins defense this year, which is going to push them into more pass-heavy scripts, and Jalen Waddle should be a big part of that. Like, there's so little projection needed when it comes to Jalen Waddle to imagine him having just another really incredible fantasy season.
So when we look at Jalen Waddle, he might be one of the first players here that, while he's not having a dip based on like news or anything, this is, in my opinion, and his ADP across all formats this year is like a dip from where it was last year. He was a player who was going pretty consistently at the 2-3 turn last year. And now he's somebody who you can get, a couple of rounds after that. It's like a seasonal dip rather than like a dip in news, but he's somebody I'm still very much buying into for the reasons that you've mentioned. I would imagine that there's a lot of people out there who have concerns that last year was where the hype was coming heading into the season and it didn't develop. But when you look back at last season in isolation, outside of those games where he was injured, there's games where he wasn't 100% healthy, and if you like factor those in or take those out, the season kind of tells a little bit of a different picture. And he's a year older heading into this offense, where I think that if you look at like depth chart wise, he's kind of in a situation where it's the two of those guys are the top of the list, and that there's not a lot of competition beneath them that's going to siphon targets away. So just how does he fit for you in that buy in the dip category? Is he somebody that you had any skepticism of at the start of the offseason, or have you been in all along this offseason?
Yeah, I've just been in all along. I think it's very easy for me to make the argument for him. Like, there's just been no point where, I mean, you go back to last year and during the bye weeks, they were talking up that one thing they really needed to do was to get him going. So there was a point during the second half of last season where I swung a few dynasty trades for Jalen Waddle, thinking he might be the piece to put me over the edge. So I don't think I'm completely locked into that take and ignoring the downside. But I mean, Odell Beckham's still not practicing, and he was fine for the Ravens last year in a limited role. But Jonnu Smith,
I have a feeling that the retirement announcement may not be far away. I don't know if we see Odell this season at all. I think Malik Washington's probably the next guy up on that passing core.
Well, yeah, the thing with Beckham as well is he finished the season healthy in terms of, he was playing in the playoffs, so there was no talk about him being injured. So to get a few months later and for him to not even be healthy at this point in camp, when last year for the Ravens he was in a much better way health wise, I buy that argument. But yeah, like Jonnu Smith is a fun player who we could definitely have some nice weeks from. But I mean, Jalen Waddle is a Pro Bowl caliber player.
100%. Malik Neighbors, who I did mention, did go with the 5'10". I'm expecting, in terms of, I think the hype's going to get him pushed up up into that, Waddle area. And I would be comfortable taking him at that particular point. But again, I started the offseason very high on Neighbors, but the market is now starting to get to that point where you're like, that is kind of where I would have had him at that point. So he's moving right on up. Jalen Waddle, like, I mentioned the last season, he finished last season with 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns, 72 receptions. He did have 1,300 yards the previous season and 8 touchdowns, but just 3 more receptions year on year. And I just think that, a lot of things did not go his way last year. We could be looking at a 100 reception season, I think, coming up here in a monster year for the true breakout of Jalen Waddle. So brilliant to get him as our second wide receiver on this roster. We are going to be ticking back over now into a range where I did mention Geno Smith as, one of your favorite fallback options. We start to get into a point here, though, with, Zay Flowers will be going in this range. We will have to, unfortunately, pass on Brock Bowers based on having the 2 tight ends early. But when we look down through some of the names, we are starting to get into a point where having to consider those Chiefs wide receivers possibly in this lineup. How early do you want to start considering the likes of Rice, who generally in the last kind of week or so is going in the mid-7th round? He would be the one that generally is going before Xavier Worthy, who's the mid-9th round. But probably at that 7:02 is the spot where we would need to take Rice if we want to get him on the roster. And then we'll be hoping that we get Worthy back in the 8th round potentially. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, well, I think part of it comes down to how we want to approach the quarterback position. If we do want to take another quarterback here, we're seeing a fly off the board. That team on the turn, which sort of drafted now has 3 quarterbacks. There's a bunch of teams ahead of us who have 2 quarterbacks, but also a couple of teams that have, one at the 4th spot, which is no quarterback. We just seen Aaron Rodgers go off. So it feels like a good time to be considering that. But the team on the turn does have 2. So whether we want to push our luck and take Rashee Rice first and then a quarterback second, or whether we just want to lock down quarterback, because if this team at the 104 spot takes a quarterback, then it's going to start getting pretty ugly pretty quickly.
This is as heavy as I've seen. So we're down now at the moment to Will Levis. So Will Levis generally going as QB24 in the 7th round, but obviously we're only a round ahead of that. But we're moving through the names pretty rapidly at the quarterback position. That usually makes me, lean away from the position because, they're getting drafted out of it. But the difference is that it's kind of the target that we would have hasn't been drafted. Now, Zay Flowers went 1 pick ahead of us here. So we have the option to go with, I think our pick here would be Geno Smith here and Rashee Rice. Now, I'm
good with that, yeah.
But I'm also good if you want, like, I'm okay missing out on Geno, but I know that you might want to get him on the roster. Do you want to get Geno here?
Well, if we don't take Geno, then I still feel like we'd need another quarterback here. Then you're talking about Derek Carr. So it's either Geno or Derek Carr. I'll let you make the pick because I don't think both of them are going to go if you really feel like Rashee Rice is a must-click pick here.
Do you want to risk it then?
Well, I doubt that Rashee Rice is going ahead of T. Higgins, DJ Moore, and but maybe I'm wrong.
We have the opportunity to go DJ Moore and Rashee Rice if you wanted to do that.
No.
We'll take Geno then.
I think I like DJ Moore, but
that's a crazy. It's quite a good discount on DJ Moore at that particular price. Usually going, the 604, you'd be getting them at the 6. But the thing is now that, I think if we get an opportunity between DJ Moore and Rashee Rice, that we probably should go with the Rice pick.
I think, and like Ben Gretcher's made the point so many times and made it so well about DJ Moore that he just hasn't seen substantial competition throughout his career from top tier talent. You're talking about guys like Curtis Samuel or Robbie Anderson, who were the guys he was competing with. And even then at times, yes, he was having bad quarterback play, but it wasn't always spectacular. So I just find DJ Moore a difficult pick. And when I do make it, it tends to be when he falls past ADP like now. But structurally, it just kind of made more sense that in this quarterback heavy room, taking Geno and then going Rashee Rice if he makes it back to us for the stack. It just.
So what you're saying in this room, you're not buying the dip on DJ Moore?
I'm not buying the dip on DJ Moore. I think he's just a player that I've kind of made peace with the idea that I could be very wrong about this year. And if that happens, I'm all right. Like, I've drafted more Keenan Allen. I'm not worried about the weight rumors. I've drafted a decent bit of Rome Odunze, particularly over here where you can get him really cheaply. And I just find those easier clicks. I mean, it's like the ambiguous backfield argument when ambiguity kind of plays a big part in it. You just take the cheaper pieces, and Keenan Allen coming off like 11.5 targets per game last year and leading the league. It's just, I'm not prepared to believe that he's completely toast, but maybe in a couple of weeks' time, I have egg on my face on that one.
He may not be completely toast, but it did sound a couple of weeks ago like he may have eaten all the toast. That being Keenan Allen, but those rumors seem to be greatly over exaggerated. We do get the opportunity here to get back into to get Rashee Rice. I think if this is a room where we don't have quarterback and Patrick Mahomes, I think you lean there to DJ Moore for me. You have T Higgins as well as an interesting option. Rashee Rice though is the pick here.
Yeah, very fine with that.
We could also see ourselves getting into. I like to bring up these bye week things as drafts go along, but we do have Waddle and Rice week 6, and we're probably or hopefully going to have Worthy, but I think we can fill that out throughout the rest of the draft. But we would have to kind of avoid week 6 wide receivers from that point moving forward, but we would be able to obviously week 6 at other positions. We do now get Geno Smith paired with Patrick Mahomes, which I think is a nice combination. We have a lot of Geno Smith as our QB2 in this format, I would have to admit. So hopefully it works out with Geno this season. But yeah, that was giving us a nice opportunity to potentially go in a different direction. And the other thing I don't like giving up is like we now give the Caleb Williams drafter DJ Moore. And it was interesting that he passed on DJ Moore for Zay Flowers before that. That was interesting, I thought.
Well, he got Zay Flowers with Lamar Jackson and that week 17 correlation with Nico Collins. So I can kind of understand that. But yeah, it's it worked perfectly for them.
Yeah, they're having a pretty nice start to that particular side of the draft. They get a discount on Puka, obviously, with his injury. They get Caleb Williams, Kyron Williams, Nico Collins, Flowers, and DJ Moore. So there's some very interesting teams that have been built here so far. But yeah, more there. The part of this is like if I was drafting that solo, and I like to balance these out as well, like I probably would have taken 2 wide receivers there. But sometimes then later in the draft, I can start to feel it like, you have got nipped a little bit. Like we do see Bo Nix, who has been one of my priority targets in that particular type of strategy, go at the 704. His ADP is generally at the 904 in these drafts, so 2 rounds earlier. But obviously preseason has a pretty solid performance in the last Broncos game, and that makes those jumps sometimes happen. So I think Tom going with Geno there now, having seen Nix go off the board, like I probably think that we would have got caught out in this room because he's one of the fallback options that I tend to have.
Yeah, and it's very much like now you'd be looking at Daniel Jones, who's looked pretty bad in preseason, but I'm not a Drew Lock believer, and I do think that Daniel Jones starts the vast majority of the season. Looking at Derek Carr, whose own fans in New Orleans absolutely do not care.
That was the other thing that I meant to say. We have consistently drafted Chris Olave, but we have consistently passed on Derek Carr. And people do ask, do we have concerns about Olave in that offense? Like, I think Olave scores a huge amount of points, but I think Derek Carr is not the quarterback to be, adding to your roster for the quarterback points in your lineup. Chris Olave can have big point totals without Carr getting there.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Derek Carr, it was kind of encouraging that down the stretch last year, he really came along and he was much better than he'd been for the vast majority of the season. I think he finished 2023 with 2 top 7 fantasy finishes in the final 3 weeks, but we just saw so much of a bigger sample of him last year not being particularly fantasy viable. So I think that's the kind of thing that you're getting from Derek Carr these days. And the biggest concern for me there is that the offensive line is going to be so completely awful that Derek Carr might not have the time in the pocket for consistently, whereas like they'll be able to scheme things to Chris Olave. They'll find ways to get Chris Olave the ball. But if you're looking for Derek Carr to really create magic, that's where I struggle with it. And if he's taking an awful lot of sacks behind that offensive line constantly, then it might hit the point where, we're talking about a guy who's injured or just struggling anyway.
Yeah, and Derek Carr did go to the drafter in the 11th spot. So again, Tom pushing that Geno Smith pick on me, I think has probably put us in a better shape here as we move forward. But to get up now through 7 rounds to the 3 receivers, having the 2 tight ends, and then Patrick Mahomes and Geno Smith. And I think in this format, you're probably starting 3 wide receivers each week. But one of the things to think about is like with that tight end position, and then basically the additional flex is going to be probably filled by that tight end. So it's going to be interesting when you go for those 2 tight ends. I'm less pushed on who the 3rd and 4th quarterback is, because I think you're basically treating one of those tight ends as the additional super flex in some of those weeks. So at the end, we may regret it. I'm wondering with you now with the tight end position, how much are we willing to, push,
Yeah,
I always want more tight ends in this tight end premium format, but I do think that we probably like 4 tight ends is usually the best way to go in this format. But I think that we're probably pushing it all the way down for me to that Greg Dulcich kind of tier, which is my favorite tier, obviously.
Yeah, maybe slightly earlier for me, like the Jonnu Smith, possibly even Ben Sinnott, who I've largely been out on, but seems to be getting some good beat now. Mike Gesicki, Colby Parkinson. I'm not as high on Mike Gesicki, but Colby Parkinson at his price seems like an okay bet. Juwan Johnson, Greg Dulcich, Theo Johnson, all guys who I don't mind. I mean, even Jatavian Sanders seems to be actually getting some positive buzz now after playing a decent bit. But even then, I think Nathan Yankee of PFF noted that he was still coming off the fields on 3rd downs for those obvious passing situations. So maybe he's not all the way there yet.
Yeah, and it will take time with rookies to develop. Like, wouldn't expect them to be coming on at this point and have everything nailed down at this stage. Xavier Worthy did go to the drafter out of 10. That is a team with Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, Achan, Cup, Neighbors, Pittman, Higgins, and Worthy. I do like how that team has kicked things off there. So we miss out on him, but having got Rice obviously gives you that little bit of an advantage. I haven't been I haven't been drafting Hollywood Brown much now, obviously with the injury. But maybe this is a case. Is he somebody that you would buy a dip on? I thought that he was too expensively priced to kick things off. How are you feeling about Hollywood Brown?
Yeah, I don't mind that because, I mean, this is kind of the ticket on Hollywood Brown. You're going to get these little knocks and injuries as a smaller bodied wide receiver. He does miss time because of it. We've seen it consistently throughout his career. And I think the way that Hollywood wins and the way that Hollywood seems to have this deep ball connection with Mahomes is going to be very valuable in fantasy when it does hit. I do think it's a little bit like, fancy MVS in some ways, but I'm kind of all right with that as long as the price is dipping, and to know we'd be gaining leverage on the way that certain people were drafting a few weeks ago when he was being overdrafted. So I don't mind that. I think, at this turn, it kind of sets up reasonably well. I don't mind some of the running backs in this range. I don't mind Christian Kirk. I like Chris Godwin. But where are you leaning towards, Colm?
So I think that, I've mentioned Fields all offseason. I think it's too much of a luxury pick to take him here at this particular point. He won't get back to us, but it's Aaron Jones, Stevenson, Chase Brown, Mostert, and Javonte Williams and Tyjae Spears. There's a lot of running back options. This is a point where on the wraparound, I think that we would take JSN probably, or Keenan Allen. So I think we go running back here, and I don't know if you've a priority. I think that like Jones and Stevenson are probably ahead of those other guys.
I'd go Ramondre Stevenson, mainly because, I mean, youth on his side. I'm not expecting the Patriots to be particularly good, but also I think Aaron Jones with a week 6 bye,
Actually,
then we'd be looking.
That's a good point. I was just going to say that just before you mentioned it. So I think we go Stevenson here.
It's just too many of like players that we're counting on to be in our week. To be in our lineup every week, to then have 1 week where maybe we'd be taking a worse score. But and I also find myself drafting a lot of Ty Chandler.
You didn't make the pick. I thought you were making the pick.
I thought you were making the pick.
We ended up with Aaron Jones. We will be okay though. We'll balance it out as we go along. No more week 6s. We were obviously planning to draft Worthy if he got back to us, so it just kind of balances that out. Wide receiver wise, though, and Stevenson's interesting here too. If we wanted to get a second running back, I did mention the advantage of running backs, and you kind of mentioned Aaron Jones and from a downside. I do think there's the opportunity for him to have a big impact in Minnesota, as tough as that would be for me as a Green Bay Packers fan. And it may just be spike week related, but I do see him having a solid season. The problem is he is often banged up or injured and missing time. But I do have a soft spot for Aaron Jones. And at this price, I think it's a fair market value to be drafting him. I think in previous years, he would be in that Rashad White range in the 5th round. So I'm good with that. What if went for Stevenson? But maybe that was me purposely not clicking the button. I honestly thought you were going to draft him. But we see Jaden Reed get drafted, and now we're in a position here where we're kind of between ADP-wise, Keenan Allen will be like probably the next wide receiver, or Christian Kirk. But if we wanted to stack JSN, now would be the time to do it. And I think that's probably the way I would go.
I'm fine with that. Yeah, I think like you could have made an argument to push it. It is on the edge of where maybe comes back to us, but I like
if you have a running back that you really do want to go for, I'm okay to push it. But if you don't have one to push, that would be the way.
It probably would be Ramondre, but I don't feel super strongly about it now that we've already got one running back on the roster.
Okay, just for purposes, am I clicking the button or are you clicking the button?
I've clicked the button.
Okay. We figured it out.
See, there we go. Good communication got us back on track.
We had a technical issue on that last pick. I don't have being honest, I don't have a strong preference between Stevenson and Jones, 1v1. I think that they'll probably be pretty close. Like you mentioned earlier with Travis Etienne, and I mentioned I was, in on him last year. I was massively in on Ramondre Stevenson, and it, was tough at times last year, but the offense was a train wreck. But I'm hoping that the Patriots offense takes a big step forward with the way things are changed this year, but it may just be a similar situation again this season. So, that's the trouble there with the Patriots offense.
Yeah, I mean, the bull case for Ramondre would be that he was just kind of rounding into form when he got injured. It was those last few weeks he finished as the RB2, the RB20, and RB7, and then missed the rest of the season. So it felt like he was kind of finding his feet again, and then it all, came crumbling down when he was injured. But I do think that there's a good chance he can bounce back this year. I don't want to get super high on him like I was last year because of the offense and because they could be quite poor. But
that is a kind of a buy in the dip scenario, because he is going multiple rounds less than he was last year. But you can tell probably when we're talking about him, there is that little apprehension of we're going back in, but we're not all the way.
Not all the way in. Yeah, definitely. But I also think
profile is too good to completely miss out on.
Yeah, and another Patriots player who I'm buying the dip on is Drake May. We've seen over the last couple of weeks that he dipped down on single quarterback formats to an ADP of around 200. And then all of a sudden we get to now, and Gerard Mayo today was saying that it's too soon for him to name a week one quarterback. There's lots to be figured out. The gap isn't substantial between Drake May and Jacoby Brissett. And I think that we are going to see Drake May potentially out there in week one, and it'd be the right choice. He came from North Carolina where he had an awful offensive line. He had awful receiving weapons. Why not get him out there and just let him experience the NFL? But I've always been team start your rookie quarterbacks early, and I know that not everybody falls into that category.
Here's a dip that we might get in this draft, because we just seen Gardner Minshew get drafted, obviously named as the starting quarterback for the Raiders, but Aidan O'Connell normally goes as QB 34 in the 14th round, and I think that we'll see a situation that's the late 14th, 14-11 generally. If he would get back to us in the maybe the 18th would be really appealing, because as much as Gardner Minshew and Minshew Mania is a fun thing, I do think that we're in a situation where it doesn't last, and I think we'll see that fade, and we'll see O'Connell in before the season's over, so he could get interesting. I'm just looking here. You mentioned the drafter in 12 has the three quarterbacks starting off. They had Burrow, Goff, and Deshaun Watson. We do have the drafter in 6 who passed on quarterback for 5 rounds, but has since gone Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson. So they've paired the two Steelers quarterbacks together. Fair enough. If people want to do that, you could do that previously at prices, in the double-digit rounds, not in 9 and 10. So I don't know.
I think if I was going to do that, I wouldn't have. It would be if I hadn't taken Baker Mayfield. If my first quarterback was Derek Carr, and then my second quarterback's Daniel Jones, then I'd pair the Steelers quarterbacks together and say, okay, well, I've got 4 who are going to make it up, but I'm not sure I could get to 5 on that one.
Yeah, it's going to be challenging to see them balance that roster out. We'll see as the draft goes on, but we are at 2. The majority of the room now has 2. Most teams are up to 3 at this point. One team, as we mentioned, with 5. So again, the advantage of those sort of picks is somebody might slide back towards us. Stevenson and Chase Brown. I like some of the picks that the team at 12 has got value-wise. They did get Stevenson and Chase Brown at that turn, which is nice. But I'm hoping that we see some players sneak their way back to us, maybe in that running back mold. We do see Jonathan Brooks go off the board. He was somebody who I was still buying the dip based on his injury, but again, hoping that he's back early in the season or potentially even week 1. Tyjae Spears was somebody I had in the queue at that last point. I would love Jameson Williams to get back. He's somebody that I don't know. I can't remember, Tom. I'm drafting with all these different people, some of the RotoViz team, with yourself. And it tends to be every time I mention certain players, it's like, oh, I'm out on him or I haven't drafted him. I can't remember. Are you out on Williams? You in on Williams? What's your thoughts here? I'm in. And I'm in on both. I'm in on both. I'm in on Jaleel as well. I have both of those guys heavily rostered.
So myself and Rich, my co-host on Fantasy Sanctuary, put out a wide receivers to avoid video this weekend, and Jameson Williams was one of the players Rich brought to the table.
Javonte Williams, I'm talking about.
Oh, Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams I was out on, and then Ben Gretsch kind of convinced me, and then I was back in on him, and then I drafted him a few times, and then I didn't particularly enjoy it. But now that we're seeing the camp reports and we're seeing the preseason usage, I'm definitely more in on him. So I don't mind taking Javonte Williams here. I do have some concerns that even if Samaje Perine's traded or cut, that Audric Estime gets some of the pass down rolled, gets some of the goal line work, and Jaleel McLaughlin is just a really good player, but I don't mind taking Javonte Williams here because I think he fits the build that we've got.
I think he fits absolutely perfectly. So
at the minute,
so we don't run out of time again.
Yeah. So at the minute, we're just putting together a series of videos with various fantasy football experts who people would know. And today I sent out a bunch of messages asking for players from these people who are coming on. And 3 of the 4 guests we have lined up all said Jaleel McLaughlin was their favorite sleeper.
And I was actually surprised because I'm having these conversations, as I mentioned, when we're making picks, as you know, we be having them. But I was shocked that when I was pitching Javonte to people, lots of people kept talking about Jaleel. And then I went in and I was at 27% Jaleel and, 19% on Javonte. So it was a case of like, I didn't even realize how high I was on him. And obviously a lot of people are expecting things. Had a real positive impact at a stretch last season, but didn't continue for the entire season. But I think when you're like looking at, how we talked a moment ago about Stevenson, Javonte was another player in that mold for me, and he's going at a discount. So when we're looking at players who's not this season, you're buying the dip, but I'm classing Javonte Williams as a player who's dipped below a cost that he should be at this particular point. And I have a feeling it's going to be those 2 guys just leading the back. Estime, I think, will be involved, but I think the other 2 take the majority of the work. The interesting part here, McConkey goes, we have one more pick to get back to us. I think this is probably going to be another running back selection. My most drafted running back at the moment is Nick Chubb. I don't think I'm going to make you draft Chubb. I think he could even sneak back to us. But
I'm surprised on that one, Colm.
So I'll talk more about it in a second, but we may get Tyjae Spears here. Devin Singletary is another player that I've drafted quite a heavy amount. Any players here, like, Hollywood Brown's available, but I think I would bypass it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I put Hollywood Brown in the queue, but I'm happy to push it and see whether he'd come back around. Like, that's the way I'd rather play Hollywood Brown. I was just making sure that we knew he was there. Brian Robinson's my most drafted running back this year. I like Tyjae Spears. I like Devin Singletary. This is the area of the draft that I want to come out with 2 running backs every time. So I did
the Javonte pick, so I'll let you go. I'm good on Unless it's Zach Moss, I'm good on the rest of the guys, I think.
Well, we'll take Brian Robinson, then. It's like, for me, this has probably been one of the biggest stands I've made this year across like 300 drafts. I'm at close to 30% Brian Robinson, and part of it is a hedge against Austin Eckler, who I'm very aware that, you know, he could be healthier after coming off a high ankle sprain last year. But the way that Austin Eckler has fed over the years has been in the passing game. And now he's going to play with a dual threat quarterback who's behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league. So might not be checking down as much as he'd like, might just be scrambling for his life at times. And also goal line work. And when you go back to the point where the Commanders running back coach, whose name eludes me, it's not Juice Daly, Anthony Lynn was with Austin Eckler in LA. That was when Austin Eckler didn't have the goal line work. And we know Brian Robinson is a pretty decent goal line back. We know that Jaden Daniels sees himself as an option around that area. We saw in the first preseason game, Jaden Daniels run the ball in for a touchdown. So I just don't think that Eckler's going to see as big a volume as he needs to pay off. But I think Brian Thomas can absolutely see the hard work between the tackles. I mean, Austin Eckler, it's hard to forget that this is a running back who virtually every year for the last 3 years has said somebody else needs to stand up and take some of these touches. He's the only running back in the NFL who doesn't want the ball on every touch.
So I have got most of my exposure to Brian Robinson and drafts with you, and the main reason for that is not due to the fact that I dislike Brian Robinson. I have liked him since he came into the league. I often tell the story about Zachary Kruger being the boots on the ground in Washington that touted him up for me in his rookie season. But we're in a range here where I am tending to go, you know, for example, Javonte, as I talked about there, and I probably would go Spears over him at that particular point. But this is also a range where it is the wide receiver cliff. So wide receivers still available: Christian Watson, Jameson Williams, Keon Coleman. Then you start to get down into DeAndre Hopkins and start to move down a little bit more. And I'm hopeful that we may still get like a Jordan Addison potentially back at that next turn. Yeah. But it's tricky to know. But if the room goes in a slightly different direction here, we may get quite fortunate at the wide receiver position. But it is the wide receiver cliff. So if I'm in a team where maybe I have let JSN get back and he made it to the 10-11 there, I would be taking him and let's say Javonte or Spears. So it's just a case of he's in an area where it's squeezed for me in a different direction. And I mentioned Nick Chubb. He's starting to move up into this range. Previously, he would have been going a good bit later. We did get a question in the chat, and that was, what's good trade value for Nick Chubb? And my advice on that would be that the highest, like this is the lower point of what the value is going to be, is when he is active and when he is off the PUP. That is when you'll see people be like, oh, Nick Chubb is still an NFL player. I want to have him on my roster. So that will be the time that I'd be looking to move him rather than now. But for me, Nick Chubb probably falls into that category of you're probably not going to get a ransom for him. So he's probably a player that you play to zero at this particular point in your dynasty leagues, because I think down the stretch this year, the upside that he'll give you on a team that would be potentially contending versus moving him on for something, future pick or a player at a different position, I don't know if we're really going to see that work out value-wise for you. But Chubb is a player, along with TJ Hawkinson, who I have been trying to draft because they're players who should be going multiple rounds higher if they're healthy. So he is somebody who, if he was not coming in with this injury, and it's a serious knee injury, and like I remember the time that he got injured, like last year I had 0% Nick Chubb, but when he got hurt, like I felt like, this was a really bad one. Like you didn't know if he would ever get back. Now this shows my knowledge of fantasy football. The team with 5 quarterbacks has drafted Nick Chubb. That mightn't be a good sign for me. But I do think that if he's healthy come week 6, for example, he should not be going at this point. My pitch to you earlier this offseason, Tom, was with Justin Fields. If he is anywhere near the starting quarterback for the Steelers, he should not be going in the 18th round of BBM. Now, at this point, you can see even Justin Fields is never going to be the best pocket passer. He's never going to, but it's the profile of the player. You get Nick Chubb in that situation and he starts rushing for 60-yard touchdowns. He's going to be worth the 10th round pick.
Yeah, and this is what I struggle with it because we know coming off these multi-knee ligament, multi-surgery injuries that
Most of
there's
the time, it doesn't
potential.
work out.
Yeah, and I've been on the wrong side of it on J.K. Dobbins a couple of times. I've been on the Javonte Williams side of it last year as well. And I think when you look at what the Browns have done this offseason in terms of their tailoring their offense around Deshaun Watson more now, because they have to. They're really in a situation where their back's against the wall. They have to figure out whether Deshaun Watson can function in this offense. So if they move to more of a spread offense, is that going to suit Nick Chubb as much as it suits somebody like Jerome Ford? I think that you look at the fact that Donta Foreman has played with the running backs coach before in Carolina, and you look at the fact that Pierre Strong is apparently going to be on special teams, which will make him active every week. So maybe one of Donta Foreman or Jerome Ford would struggle to have a huge role. But I think this is just going to be more of a committee, and I think the Browns are going to take it easy on Nick Chubb because he's been a big part of their culture over the last few years, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to push him unless they absolutely have to. And I don't see Nick Chubb
I
kind
don't
of
think
getting back
teams
to
put
it.
players on their rosters like you keep them on PUP all year. If that's like, there's no token gestures of players that are going to be like lined up. Somebody like Nick Chubb. Like I think
Oh no,
Donnie
but
Foreman's inactive is the way that plays out.
I just don't see them featuring him in the way they have previously. I'm good with Jordan Addison here
Yeah.
if you are.
The one concern with Jordan Addison is it is week 6, but the talent
Okay.
is too much to pass up here. I think we're probably just going to have to figure out wide receiver as we go here. I think
Um,
I think that we should draft him. The other one I
yeah,
haven't drafted at all is Tyler Lockett, who would fit in with the Geno Smith side of things here. Then I'd be down to Dontavian Wicks probably,
yeah, I think
and I
if we
can't
were gonna
draft.
go Lockett, I'd rather push that another round and take one of these running backs here. So I'll let you pick a running back if you want to take Tyler Lockett in the next
I
round.
think we should risk Addison and see can we fix it.
Okay, let's do that. And then I mean,
There's too much of a talent difference, and he is going here at a little bit of a discount.
yeah,
It may be something we come back to regret at the end, and it might be a case where week 6 is a disaster. But if we set this up where we have the 2 tight ends who would both be available in week 6, we would only have one quarterback would be the concern as well. But we would have the running backs available, and we could be in a situation where you only need to start 2 wide receivers. So if we could get it into the rest of the draft, so yeah, I just think that that's unfortunate. Like you mentioned Jameson Williams earlier, but I would have taken him at that point if he had admitted he went 4 picks earlier. So we add Addison. That leaves us, just for people wondering what we're talking about, we have Addison, Rashee Rice, Jalen Waddle as our week 6 wide receivers. But again, I would go back to the point of the pick would have been, if we didn't take Aaron Jones and Worthy made it, we would have taken Worthy. So we would have still been in that same boat. So it's just about managing it now the rest of the way here. You mentioned the running backs. Charbonnet is somebody who's available here, would also be in the Seahawks build here if you were interested in adding him. Have you, Dobbins is somebody I have been drafting, and I know some people don't want to draft him, might be skeptical of his recovery. And but I think, again, if healthy, the talent is so high that he shouldn't be going at this point.
Yeah, and I've mixed him in more lately at ADP than I was doing. Whereas over the first couple of months of best ball season, it was much more buying when you get past ADP. I mean, I did one with Eric Bimefor early on in draft season where we took J.K. Dobbins 55 spots past ADP, and Eric really didn't want to take him, but you hit a certain point, you have to. So I don't mind J.K. Dobbins. I don't mind Zach Charbonnet. It's not been much positive for him lately. I mean, I'd be happy to take Tyler Lockett here and give ourselves that hedge against week 6, unless you feel strongly you want to go Dontavian Wicks over Tyler Lockett.
I think Dontavian Wicks is a better football player, at the end of the season than Lockett would be my thoughts. Sure, you don't want to go running back here?
Well, which
Not
of the
often
two
I
would
give
you?
you that option. It'll be Dobbins or Charbonnet I would take, because Corum is a week 6 buy as well, so that would put me past him.
Well, let's go Charbonnet. Like, I'm a bit more open to. Are you happy with that? If I hit that button, and then I'll explain my thinking.
Yep.
So I'm just more open to QBRB stacks in this year than I have been in recent years.
And I would rather stack with Charbonnet than Lockett, and that could turn out to be a terrible decision at the end of the season. But I think for this roster, it works out better.
Yeah, definitely. And so instead of taking a player who's on the tail end of his career, I think if Tyler Lockett succeeds, it's coming at the expense of either DK Metcalf or Jackson Smith and Jigba, whereas Zach Charbonnet can succeed even if Kenneth Walker's all right or if Kenneth Walker has an injury, but that's not a problem for us. So it's much easier to kind of tell that story of success, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that maybe we get Wicks true. I don't think we will, but the other player that I would like to see if we got him true is Jerry Jeudy. He's another Cleveland Brown that I'm drafting, but we are in a narrower path here at the wide receiver position as we move forward. We will have more running back options, but it would have been the Wicks pick that I would have went to over Lockett. So when you're making that 10 or 12 ADP reach, I think that it might make sense to try and see if he slides back. I don't think he does, but it might be worth it. There's some other wide receivers here that could dip down. Rashid Shaheed's here, Jacoby Myers is here, players that I haven't really drafted very much. Then you get Mike Williams as well. Any of those names have you been drafting many of those guys or no?
I don't mind Rashid Shaheed. I probably haven't taken as much of him as I expected to because, structurally, I like to be hitting 5 wide receivers before round 10 in standard best ball. Like that's just something that consistently I do. And then I get to this range of a draft and it's like 2 or 3 running backs quite quickly.
Yeah.
And I have been taking a reasonable bit of Mike Williams lately. It sounds like he's doing well. There was I can't remember which beat reporter or which national NFL reporter it was who spent some time at Jets training camp and said that he looked really good. Brandon Cooks, I occasionally mix in just because playing the side of it, like CD Lamb hasn't practiced all summer. And of course, I'm sure he's doing what he needs to do away from training camp. But it was only a couple of years ago that Deebo Samuel went through quite a difficult contract negotiation. And then the next year he talked about how sluggish he felt because he didn't have a proper training camp. So it can go either way. Some players are able to just come back and be fine. But if CD Lamb isn't, then Brandon Cooks probably hits a decent amount of volume, I would like to think. I was taking a reasonable amount of Jahan Dotson, and we had Josh Norris from Underdog on our channel talking him up as his favorite post-hype sleeper this year. But the last week or so has definitely made me cool a bit on Jahan Dotson as, the Commanders are saying it's pretty much an open battle for the wide receiver 2 position. So maybe if the dips are substantial enough, I'll keep taking Jahan Dotson. But right now, I'm just cooling the Jets.
Yeah, and I think when you get into teams like this where it would be, you're talking your wide receiver 6 at this point, I'd say a week 6 where they would be your wide receiver 1 that you have to add them in. But Dotson is somebody who that news, even last season, like it's continuously been questionable with him over the past 12 months. Again, after his rookie season, I thought there was big things coming. Last year was a big disappointment. So if he comes back, could be in the conversation. You mentioned Mike Williams as well. If healthy, I think again this price is a way too misleading. I do think when you look at these draft rooms and you see letters beside some of the players, like the Q or the PUP, I do think that makes people stall on drafting some of those names. So there is a Q here beside Mike Williams. We'll see if he gets back. We are in a range, so as you mentioned, where there's a lot of running backs that I'd like to draft. Even Tyler Algier would be coming around in this range, but Dotson, I'm going to add him to the queue just as a potential option because I do think if we could sneak in 2 wide receivers around this turn would be very good for this roster. I mentioned Aiden O'Connell, his ADP's in this range, but I would be waiting to see if we could push him around the turn. But this is an area if you have loaded up on wide receivers and tight ends so far through the draft, there's just so many running backs that go here. Bucky Irvine, Vidal, who you mentioned earlier, and then you get into the likes of Braylon Allen, Tyrone Tracy. There was a short window to buy the dip on him the day that he got hurt, but obviously people weren't actually buying the dip, I don't think, because it seemed like his career may have been over in that moment. But we'll see how things get back. And we have obviously passed on tight end for a long way, but with having the 2 tight ends at the top, I think we're just going to have to really keep pushing it. We do see Greg Dulcich, who's one of my favorite targets, going off the board. He's really jumped up in the last couple of weeks. And even in this draft, just looking here at the ADP on RotoViz.com, I have it pulled up on the other screen, and he is going ahead of that ADP as well. He's normally going in the 17th round at the 1703. So in this one, somebody has obviously likes him even more than I do, taking him in that 14th round, so 3 rounds ahead of ADP. So it is an interesting draft for him because people have been quite aggressive on some of those picks. Mike Williams is after going off the board. Jerry Jeudy would be my preference if he makes it to us. I've added Jalen Polk to the queue as well at wide receiver. Is he somebody that you've been drafting? I've started to add him to a lot more teams over the last kind of 3 weeks or so. But as we mentioned earlier, all the concerns that I have with the Patriots offense, still ring true. But I do think that we could see Drake May, make a big difference when he gets in and have some of those deep connections. But there is concerns. You mentioned, Ben earlier in the show. Ben talked about Polk quite a bit as well, and he's somebody who there is some of the collegiate profile concerns with him as well.
Yeah, I think Polk's a guy who I don't mind drafting. I think there's definitely an upside case there. If we were talking about a guy drafted a 37th overall pick any other year over the last couple of years, we'd be a lot more excited. But because 9 wide receivers went ahead of him, it's a little trickier this year. The one player I would have made an argument for was Tyler Algier. I know we're kind of in a good place of running back, but I think Tyler Algier is one of the very best backup running backs in the NFL. So yeah, I'm okay with Jerry Jeudy here. I think he definitely helps this roster.
He's an easy pick for me on this roster. I would be I'm drafting, but I think for this roster it fits really well. So it was a case, with that last pick that we talked about, it was going to be Tyler Lockett, Dontavian Wicks, and then I mentioned Jerry Jeudy was the next wide receiver. So to take Charbonnet and then to get Jeudy on the way back is a good fit. Does add us up another week 10 bye, but I think we're balancing out those week 6 buys will be okay.
Yeah, and the one player who I'd have some interest above the players that are in our queue coming around this corner is, can I interest you in Jonnu Smith at all?
You can, but I'm kind of hopeful now that he goes in the next 2 picks here before it gets back to us. I have been drafting Smith. I just feel like the Dolphins, just like athletic players, obviously, and they have a huge amount of that on their roster. Smith fits the bill with that, but I also think that they do not use the tight end position at all. And I think that leads to a situation where he may just be another one of those tight ends like Mike Gesicki was, that is a lot of athletic profile that doesn't get that opportunity.
No, I'm fine with that. I don't feel massively strong. I think that they are going to change schematically this year because of it. Mike McDaniel said so much against that. But if we were to go wide receiver, is it Jahan Dotson or Polk for you? Or
it would be one of those unless you have a different name. But the other thing I would say is there's a lot of running backs here. And after we did manage to get Jeudy, I would be good to go back to running back if you want to go in that direction.
I mean, I like Ray Davis and Bucky Irving in this range.
They're the 2 names that I would go for because we have the week 10s already with Lloyd. So I would be open to either of those. If you have a strong preference, I'll let you actually. Yeah, both of them would fit by weeks too. You go for which one.
I'm going to go with.
I haven't much Davis. So you take Irvin. I have a lot of Irvin.
Yeah, I mean, Bucky Irving is the one I lean towards because it's just that hedge against Rachaad White. I don't enjoy where Rachaad White goes in drafts this year. You can see in this draft that it was Malik Neighbors, George Kittle, Evan Ingram, Rachaad White, Matthew Stafford, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle.
He's just not in the conversation for me there.
No, you just don't see him at ADP because it's Whereas Bucky Irving is an easy click because all reports suggest that he's playing well. I think he's got the kind of profile that can do very well if something happened to Rachaad White. I think the contingent upside's really big. I know Coach Speak Index thinks that Bucky Irving might be on the smaller side compared to what Todd Bowles likes from running backs and might not see immediate usage. But even he's walked back some of his conviction on that over the last couple of weeks and said that the amount of positive chatter about Bucky Irving from the Bucs coaches, it's hard to ignore.
I was kind of thinking there that maybe that would be my chance to get Ray Davis, share, but it obviously wasn't. Ray Davis is somebody who's been written up on RotoViz over the last kind of 24 hours, and he does have an interesting profile. He's in one of the highest, projected offenses in the NFL. Although we did mention kind of at the start, I think we were talking. I don't think we actually did talk about anything about Josh Allen, but part of the reason that I was kind of okay with him going at the 101 is it's harder to stack him, and also there's not as many options to do that you're like outside of Dalton Kincaid that you're that excited about, for me anyway. So Davis though is very interesting from the offensive perspective, but I've always held out since the Devin Singletary days with Zach Moss that we were going to see a running back breakout in this Buffalo Bills offense and just crush. And it just has never fully materialized. So maybe it just still is the case that it doesn't materialize. But Irvin's nice there. Marshawn Lloyd, talking about buy-in dips. He has that hamstring issue. I'm still buying into Marshawn Lloyd on teams that I can add him to. We did have at that particular point 4 week 10 buys added up, and we had Charbonnet with a week 10 buy at running back. So I was trying to balance it from that perspective, but he is somebody I'm interested in and buying into as well. Is he somebody that interests you, and do you have any concerns with the hamstring? The reason with a rookie I would have some more concerns with them sitting at this particular point is, you getting those reps or getting those opportunities in the preseason. It is just that experience that you don't have essentially at this point.
Yeah, it's one of those where, generally speaking, with rookies who are getting injured in training camps, more hesitant to keep adding them aggressively, whereas before Marshawn Lloyd was one of my favorite picks in like the 140 range on single QB best ball. Like, he was a very easy click for me there. Hedges against Josh Jacobs. He's on an offense we want pieces of. But now it's like, whereas before, say, I'd try to be clicking him in as many drafts as possible, you just kind of like ease back off to like a half speed on it and go, okay, well, I'm going to take him sometimes because I still believe in him. But if I take him about half as often as I was doing, then it just helps me bring my exposure down just a little and hedge against one of these players. Like, I mean, we saw it with JSN last year, the wrist injury during training camp, and then struggles to get going. We see it with, players who get injured all the time in their rookie season. It becomes really difficult for the coaches to trust them, for them to actually get on the field and get the reps they need. So yeah, I'm very much not out on Marshawn Lloyd, but I'm just reducing my volume there, I'd say.
The other part I was going to ask is with the dips, I'm much more likely to avoid buying. Like, I'm buying the reason that you wouldn't draft them, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is if they have, the coach narrative is like, against them more so than if somebody's picked up an injury, like a hamstring injury, that's going to keep them out 3 weeks. I would still be more likely to draft somebody with the injury concern than I am when it's like, it feels like this person's just non-existent. And I guess that's where Kendre Miller falls into, who's somebody who would be coming up in this next kind of 2-pick range. So we'll see what we maybe get into discussion with him. I have drafted him a couple of times, again, as I mentioned, as the drop continues, but I'm trying to get him now, a bit like you were talking with J.K. Dobbins earlier, in that area where he's just like slid beyond by basically 2 rounds to get back to you. So if we passed on him here at the next turn and he came back to us in the 18th round, that's where you start to think about it. The other part we have to think about now is we do have 2 quarterbacks. We do have 5 picks remaining. We probably do want to look, at adding some, but what I've been doing at the quarterback position, when I get to this point, if I hadn't added a 3rd quarterback, I am kind of looking down to the Jameis Winston, Sam Howell, Joe Flacco territory. And one thing that I've only done it once in a draft, but when you have, Sam Howell potentially in the 20th round, if he was to come back to us here and you have a Geno Smith roster, I think there's like some sense maybe to insulating your, if you went with 3 quarterbacks, but one of them was the backup to Geno Smith, I think that can work as well. So we have a couple of things. What are you thinking about though with quarterback the rest of the way here?
Yeah, I'm not in on Sam Howell. I've always not been in on Sam Howell, and I think I struggle.
You're the opposite way then.
Yeah, I know he's one of the players that we just never see eye to eye on. But guys like Michael Penix, I think, is kind of fine. You look at what the Falcons did this weekend, keeping him out of the preseason game. despite the fact that he's an older prospect, if Kirk Cousins works out, then he doesn't play until next year. Like, there's definitely a world where this Falcons team doesn't make the playoffs and Michael Penix playing games at the end of the season. Joe Flacco, it's an easy one to convince yourself, okay, Anthony Richardson gets hurt again, and Joe Flacco's in there dealing to like A.D. Mitchell, Michael Pittman, and potentially Josh Downs at the end of the season. And Jameis Winston is just the hedge that we all like taking, that Deshaun Watson is just bad at football. And yeah, we get some fun Jameis Winston time to end the season. So I don't mind pretty much any of those guys. Even Tyrod Taylor as a hedge against Aaron Rodgers feels all right. But yeah, I mean, I'm fine to keep pushing things.
I think it's the 19th, 20th rounds probably where we are. Like, it sounds like, unless Penix would be the one that would probably go earlier than that. We do get Wan'Dale Robinson going off the board, who I would like to potentially get. Josh Downs gets drafted. We're one pick away from getting Polk back to us here, and we do get him back. Can I interest you in a piece of Polk at this price?
I was about to argue for Juwan Johnson over Polk, but let's go Polk. But yeah, I mean, Polk was a player I would have been content to take in the last round. So,
is there any other names that you're looking to pitch here?
Not over.
I think the tight ends, you mentioned Sanders or even Tucker Kraft or Michael Mayer. They're all players that are going to go, in 2 rounds time. It's kind of between running back and wide receiver here for me. And he's clearly above the rest, unless you wanted to go for Marvin Mims potentially, or if you want to go for a running back and then try and get Jalen Tolbert later, that's something I would be open to too. But what do you want to do then, Polk?
Let's do Polk, yeah, and then I think and I quite like a bunch of the running backs here. Like Vidal at this price feels fine now. Khalil Herbert still feels like possibly the best running back on the Bears. Dameon Pierce, I've been drafting a lot of lately. I think that there's a lot of positive buzz that he's picked up the scheme in Houston properly this year, and he could be really useful with Joe Mixon already injured.
Will Shipley.
I mean, Will Shipley I have on an absurd amount of teams, partly because we've drafted him a lot, and it's a good hedge against Saquon Barkley, who I've only taken maybe on 2 or 3 teams all off season. So I don't mind taking Will Shipley. I feel like that's kind of something that we have to do in every draft we do together.
It's like for the brand, but we do also have, like, Vidal is, by ADP is going 28 picks ahead of him. So there's also that part of things is to factor in that, you shouldn't just take him because he's somebody who we like to draft together. We may be better to go with the Vidal pick here. So I'm not going to push Shipley on you. He's a player that I like in this range, but he also goes a good bit beyond. If you want to, like, I think there's even a chance that he slides back around to us. So do you want to go with the Vidal pick, or pick your favorite running back and let's take him?
Well, let's take Vidal because he's probably going to rise more. I think like we'd be ahead of a rise if we got him here. So maybe we're getting him towards the bottom of his price. So yeah, let's buy the dip on Vidal.
Okay, we did it eventually. We've got to round 17, but our show title has now been proven to be factually correct that we have really liked it. So we do buy the dip on Vidal, and I think
we bought the dip on Jordan Addison as well.
Yeah. The dip on Jordan Addison is a bit like the dip on Rashee Rice, where the concern was around the suspension, and it feels like that may not be going to happen this year either. Yeah. So there's a couple of things that are like the red flags around him, even the quarterback concerns. I think that it's been way over corrected, and I think that he shouldn't be going at this point. So I'm definitely still buying the dip on Jordan Addison. I mentioned the FFPC main event for people who aren't familiar with the main event. It is a $2,000 buy-in. Myself and Sean Siegel did draft Jordan Addison in that draft as well. So putting the money down on Addison in multiple ways here. We are 3 picks remaining. This team, because the one thing I will say, Thomas, when we look at the board now, because we did go with the 2 tight ends early, we have been able to add a lot of options at running back and wide receiver. And the advantage of getting a Patrick Mahomes pick and then landing on Geno Smith where we did, like, ideally you would want to have 4 quarterbacks in this format, but I mentioned that I would normally be pushing quarterback potentially even further than we did here. So, like, we could end up here with 3 quarterbacks, 3 tight ends, and then like we're pretty much loaded up at the other positions with a lot of advantages. Quite often you'll feel like, you know, the running back and wide receiver positions kind of suffer in this format, but I feel like that we're in a pretty good spot. Have you any concerns though with just having the 2 tight ends, or are you know, okay because we've spent so much on them that if they don't deliver, the team is dead anyway?
I mean, it's definitely part of that, but like having an extra one to cover bye weeks or something,
Yeah.
maybe you get lucky and the
I mean
third
more
will
than, I think we will get a third. I mean more only
yeah,
having at this point. Is there like any concerns with
not
it? I
really.
think it has actually given us positional flexibility just to focus on running back and wide receiver throughout the
Yeah,
draft.
because I mean, if we ended up taking, say, Dallas Goedert in the 7th round, or say Dalton Schultz in the 8th round, or something, then immediately by the time we got to round 11, round 12, we'd have to be looking to take another tight end again. Whereas
Yeah.
that's the point where we kind of sorted out our running back room. So no, I feel very pleased with how things are balancing overall. It's like, I think one of the great things about drafting with different people, like we quite fundamentally approach these Superflex drafts differently when we draft on our own.
Yeah.
But when we draft together, we quite often end up on these roster constructions or
They're a
player
bit different. Like they're kind of
builds.
nearly in
Yeah.
the middle of the two of them, and the one thing I'll say, I tend to feel like and usually it's my fault, Tom, but we tend to do some like quirky things, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
tends to be me. Sometimes it's like looking for these tight ends earlier, that, but usually when we finish up these drafts, I feel pretty good about the board and
Yeah.
the construction of the team and how it looks. But this team is going to be constructed a bit different, I think, because usually we're looking at, you know, maybe 4 tight ends. This one, I think, 3's max, and then
Yeah.
quarterback. Maybe we would want another quarterback earlier. But what I do like, and I always mention this, if you get a quarterback who's scoring top 12 quarterback numbers, obviously that is something in your super flex spot on a weekly basis, and best ball that's going to be so advantageous. But if you get a quarterback who's like scoring you, you know, 12 points a week or 15 points a week, if you can get those tight ends, wide receivers, or running backs, they can just slot in there. It's not that it has to be a quarterback. And I think this is a team that I mentioned at the start, kind of with that mindset that maybe we are focusing on the other positions. And if you look at like the last couple of seasons, particularly last year with quarterback injuries, that was a case where a lot of teams, you know, got really destroyed because all the quarterbacks basically got hurt and they didn't have the depth to fill in other positions. So hopefully the quarterbacks don't get hurt this year, but that's something to look at. Our queue has got wiped out, Tom. We are in a range here. You mentioned Penix earlier, so he could go into it. We are looking then, you've added big speed to the queue as well. But our build so far, we have 2 quarterbacks. We are now up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 running backs, 7 wide receivers, and the 2 tight ends. So I think we're probably done at wide receiver.
Yeah.
And then the other tight end that I would pitch for here would be Jatavian Sanders. Now he does have the same bye as McBride. Michael Mayer would fit in with a week 10 bye, but I think that Mayer will be involved in that offense and 2 tight end sets. But I think that we're in a situation where he maybe doesn't have as much standalone value as Sanders. We are on the clock. The quarterbacks that are left are Brissett, Penix. Then you do get down to the, you know, the Winston, Flacco, Howell tier. I haven't drafted a single share of Penix this offseason.
Well,
if you want to do it, you do it.
I'd rather push him around the corner and take another tight end, to be honest. Like, I'd be fine with Jatavian Sanders. I think that he's the kind of player with upside that would be fun here.
Yeah, and no bye week concerns. I'm not really. I'm thinking just like the upside. Let's go upside here. Yeah.
Okay, so take Jatavian Sanders. I mean, the thing with Penix is it could end up being a wasted pick, but like last year, I finished 8th in this tournament and had Jacoby Brissett sitting on my bench for like 15, 16 games. Like you can carry players in this format more than like on Underdog's 18-round format, definitely. Yeah. So I'm kind of open to it. And I think you have to be in the Superflex format where you're looking at some of these quarterbacks who won't play the entire season.
The other thing you could do if you just thought like, oh, we're just going with 2 quarterbacks and really risk it, you could go with, you know, Michael Mayer as another tight end, get up to 4 tight ends and really try and use tight ends in that flex every week. would be something like if you know. But again, there's nothing saying that Michael Mayer wouldn't be a wasted pick either. But if we did think that like Penix is only in there if we do get an injury to, I can't see them like at any point benching Cousins for Penix during the season outside of an injury.
Yeah, and I don't feel strong enough about Penix to really be pounding the table for him here. I just thought he would have gone by now.
Yeah.
In terms of running back, that would be the other position where we'd be looking at. I mean, Jordan Mason, AJ Dillon, Deneric Prince, Donta Foreman, Eric Gray, Keaton Mitchell, Kenny Gainwell, Jamal Williams, Cam Akers. Like,
there's not much there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind Jordan Mason or a dart throw on Keaton Mitchell, but outside of that, there's not really anyone I want.
I think we go quarterback or tight end again. So what do you want to do?
Let's go. Let's go.
We've
Michael
loads of time.
Penix.
We have 30 seconds left to go.
Well, it comes down to Michael Penix or
James
I think
Winston you might get
Rattler.
Yeah,
Spencer Rattler for a week 17. Derek Carr's been benched, but
that would allow you to go tight end here if you wanted to go tight end and then see if Rattler gets back.
Michael Mayer.
Yeah, let's do it.
Michael Mayer. I think that's fun. I think that Spencer Rattler's probably got a better chance of making it back than a lot of.
How wild would that be if that's the week 17 scenario? Chris Olave.
But I think it's perfectly realistic. I mean, Derek Carr's contract's pretty decent for him, but it's not prohibitive for the Saints who've eaten so much dead money over the years, and they're trying to clean the cap up. But like, if this is another season where Derek Carr stinks and the fans are absolutely booing him at every opportunity, if Dennis Allen's trying to save his job, which he's the third most favorite head coach to be fired as soon as the season starts, then it makes sense for if it's him or if it's even a interim coach who's in there that potentially they might want to see what we've got in Spencer Rattler. So yeah, I think it's a fun one. I think that it works, but equally it allows us to keep pushing it further. And maybe Spencer Rattler doesn't make it back to us. There is still a team about to pick who have only got 2 quarterbacks. There's a team. Yeah, and then the team at the 3 spot with Lamar and Caleb still only has 2 quarterbacks. So perhaps as it comes back through the 20th round, someone takes it. But I'm not going to feel bothered by it. Who's not taken?
Sam Howell. So we do have Penix.
I wonder why.
Yeah, Penix usually goes at the 17-12, did last year to the mid 19th. The other quarterbacks that haven't gone, you mentioned Tyrod Taylor earlier. He could fit in here. Brissett. So we have a situation where Aidan O'Connell and Taysom Hill both went in the 15th round. We had no quarterbacks drafted between that pick in the 15th round, where we've seen Hill go at the 15-10 to the 19-7. So usually in that range, you're seeing Hill, Brissett, Joe Milton, Michael Penix, Tyrod Taylor go, and then you get into Sam Howell and Spencer Rattler in the 20th round. So there isn't, quarterback went aggressively early on in this draft, and then it has, slowed down a lot in these double-digit rounds. And in fact, in the double-digit rounds, when we look at it, they are the only 2 quarterbacks that have actually gone. I haven't seen that in a draft really this offseason at all, where Drake May and Russell Wilson went in the 10th, and then no quarterback went from the 10:08 to that Aidan O'Connell pick at the 15:01. And part of that is the quarterbacks that usually go in that range are Gardner Minshew and Russell Wilson. Minshew obviously getting pulled up to the 9:09 in this one, Wilson at the 10:02. So that changed things up a bit. Michael Mayer is somebody in any draft that I haven't got Brock Bowers in, who, he's one of my most owned players this year is Brock Bowers. I've been trying to add him in. I think that there's I think they'll go with 2 tight ends quite a bit in that offense. And he, is somebody I think it's very unfortunate because coming in last year, he was, touted in terms of his own prospect for the tight end position as a rookie, and started to, come on a little bit down the end, but then obviously gets a landmine drop on top of him in the shape of Brock Bowers. So that was difficult for him. But we do have the decision I was trying to make, Tom, when we were on the clock there was basically, Penix would be the pick at that point. if you were going based on ADP or else waiting for him to come back. The tight ends, if we passed on Mayer, Everett's obviously getting a little bit of buzz, but then it's like Jelani Woods, Tyler Higbee. Then you're into guys like, Wiley, Disley, Gray that aren't really going to have an impact as Disley does go off the board. So I would have been kind of hoping that if we did pass, that maybe Everett got back to us at that point. So I am kind of glad that we passed over and got Mayer. But the ideal situation now would be if Rattler would make it back to us, as Joe Flacco also has gone off the board. I am also optimistic on the Jameis Winston side of things. So he's another one I would be looking to take here. And then I would say Tyrod Taylor. So are you happy with them and kind of in that order, Rattler, Winston, Taylor?
Yeah, that works for me. I think that, all of them give you different arguments and different theses behind them.
And they all feel like when we're in this range, they all feel like quarterbacks who could actually, get into the lineup. I feel like the Flacco one is like only injury related. I feel like the Penix one is probably injury related. I feel like Rattler could, actually come in and, Carr could be that bad. And you mentioned the contract situation. The contract situation with Watson is not as easy to get out of, I don't think, as the Carr one. But we could see, I think Winston maybe gives him a better chance to win games, but he also will turn the ball over a bunch. But we're seeing that anyway with I think quarterback.
Jameis Winston in the AFC North in deep winter outside could be very disastrous, but I think also it could be, he could be the right kind of guy at the right time to pick.
Not just disastrous, but very disastrous.
Oh, massively so. But it could also, with that amount of good wide receivers around him, David Njoku, if the offensive line's playing to a decent standard, then it could be very decent. But I think I'm not sure I would have ended up on 4 tight ends. I might have stopped at 3. But outside of running back, I definitely wouldn't have needed any more wide receivers. You look at the guys who went, I would have argued for Jalen McMillan if he fell to us. I might have argued for Rashad Bateman, Demarcus Robinson. I like Jalen Hyatt, but outside of him, every wide receiver who's gone after him, I don't think we would have benefited from. But Spencer Rattler makes it back. Are we doing that?
Yeah, let's do it for the week 17 stack. Just for the giggles. The one thing I would be looking at with this roster, you mentioned not, we didn't need to get to 4 tight ends. I think when we look at players on the board at that stage of the draft, Michael Mayer is one of the best players in terms of what he can give us this season. If we need a wide receiver, you could go with the likes of Yoshivas, but we were already kind of at the limit at the wide receiver position. And if you look at the players that went after we took Mayer, there's a huge chunk of them that are wide receivers. So, I think that it wasn't the plan, even with 5 picks to go, but getting up to 4 in this format is good. We didn't have, I would rather get up to 4 there than force in 2 quarterbacks that we probably don't want to have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think overall in those rounds, it kind of becomes a bit of where do you want to strengthen as a position more? And even though Trey McBride and Sam Laporta is exactly what we need them to both be playing to it. We need the tight end position to be an absolute dominant position for us. And even if that means occasionally Ja'Tavion Sanders or Michael Mayer gets more points than we might expect, or we rely on them in a way that we might not want to, I think it's good structurally, and I think that it's worked out quite nicely for us as an entire roster.
Yeah, so we've ended up with Geno Smith, Patrick Mahomes, Spencer Rattler. Then the running backs are Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson, Charbonnet, Ervin, Vidal. And then we get Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Rashee Rice, JSN, Jordan Addison, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Polk, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Ja'Tavion Sanders, and Michael Mayer. So there's some areas where things could be different, but I'm really happy with how it turned out after opening it up with a very unique start to it, and we'll see how it does throughout this contest. But we're trying to win the contest. We're not just trying to go and sit about here. So this getting unique may be the way to do it. But Tom, what have you got going on? You teased some of the stuff earlier. What's going on this week that the listeners can check out with you or at the Fantasy Sanctuary?
So Shortly after this finishes on Monday night, I'll be live with Kyle Dvorak of Roto World and Legendary Upside. We'll be drafting on Underdog. Then on Wednesday, I'll be drafting in the DraftKings $100 free max contest, best ball draft. We've also got JJ Zacharyson, Pete Overzet, Andrew Erickson, and John Paulson of 4 for 4 all dropping in for these quick videos that we're doing at the minute. Just a load of redraft content, really pushing a lot of that out at the minute. A lot of really good stuff on the channel. It's a fun time of year to be making content. So yeah, definitely come check us out.
Yeah, it is fun. Definitely do check it out. Myself and Sean, as I mentioned a few times, did draft in the FFPC main event on Sunday. The first edition of that will be dropping on Wednesday. The second part will drop on Friday as we go through all the players that we are most invested in 2024. We also did a show today, which is available now on the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed, where we talk about the perfect redraft plan and the tiers at each position to set you up for your draft if you are interested in that. And I will be back on RotoViz live. It's planned to be on Tuesday with Kevin doing an Underdog Best Ball Mania draft as well. So there will be more on that. Stay tuned and look out. Obviously, hopefully you're subscribed to the feed and you'll see when those shows are available. We will be back with that one as well. So my name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. You can follow Tom over on Twitter at, hit them with the handle, Tom, T-Strack NFL.
NFL_T-Strack.
Oh, I knew it was some formulation of it. But follow him over there and check out all the great work he's got going on. Until we are back, have a good one.